Everybody, thank you for joining the ACA Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective for this Tuesday, May 25th. Can't believe it's already towards the end of May. Time is flying by. We are excited to have you here with us. I'm Robert Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority. If you haven't been with us before, we'd like to start this out by thanking all of our community partners. We could not do these boot camps without them. They spend a lot of time and effort and to share their expertise with us, and we appreciate it very much. The Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective is designed to help small businesses work through the COVID crisis and return stronger than ever. It is a statewide initiative supported by our community partners, and is not only a boot camp, but it is a resource collective and a content library. So on the Small Business Bootcamp website, you can find a lot of great things. First, this is the site you most likely went to register for this session. And on this page, you can find the current sessions and some of the upcoming sessions. As well, you have the Resource Collective link. And then at the bottom of the web page, you will find the archive. The archive is where we have our content library. Now, we have been doing these boot camps for over a year of at least twice a week. And so when you factor in all the different sessions we've done, the special sessions and a year's worth of boot camps, we have over 140 sessions that have been recorded and shared in that archive, creating a massive content library of quality webinars that you can go back and view at any time at no cost. We cover just about every topic for small businesses. And so again, anytime you need to, you can go in and watch those webinars. Or if you have friends that have small businesses, you can share some of those webinars with them so that they can go back and get some education on something that may be able to help them in their business. Also, we have the Resource Collective page, as I mentioned, and on this page, you can find the tools and guides and resources provided by our community partners. This is just a sample list of some of those guides and resources that you can find on the Resource Collective. And you can see we also touch all kinds of different industries, barbershops, construction, restaurants, retail, manufacturing. A lot of great information can be found in the Resource Collective. Another great website to help with businesses in Arizona during this time is the Commerce Authority's COVID-19 Arizona Business Resources website. And on this website, you can find business guidance information, as well as financial information with the grants and loan programs at the local, state, and federal levels. And we keep that information updated as new information comes out. Additionally, the ACA has a number of programs to help support small businesses. Our small business services can help support small businesses. They work through the SBA programs or work with the SBDCs or SCORE, the Women's Business Centers, or other no-cost business support programs that are out there. We can help connect you with local banking contacts if you're looking for some funding. Additionally, our workforce division can help businesses that are looking to hire with the hiring process. And they also have some programs to train and upskill your employees. And then our manufacturing extension partnership, the Arizona MEP, can work with manufacturers to address their COVID needs, to address their future growth plans. If they want to get into lean manufacturing, they have a number of great programs and training opportunities focused on manufacturing in Arizona. Additionally, our small business checklist is available to those businesses or those individuals looking to start a business or expand and grow a product or business line. The small business checklist is an online interactive resource that helps guide people through the licensing, registration, and compliance requirements at the local, state, and federal levels. And then finally, the last website I want to mention is the state's COVID-19 information and resource page, arizonatogether.org. With that, I want to transition into some quick updates. So as of Monday evening, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program, the application window closed, and there were a lot of applications in that from the information that came out of the SBA. And so I am pretty sure that all those funds will be used up with all the applications that were received. Another key date to be aware of and be mindful of is the PPP program closes on May 31st. And there's a little bit of funding left for small businesses to process PPP loans through the community finance institutions. And these links we will post in the chat, so you don't have to try to write them down real quick. But that PPP window is closing. You do have to have your application in process by May 31st. And in process means your lender has to have it into the SBA system by that date. So if you're still working, trying to get a PPP loan, your window's closing very quickly. If you're not working with a community development or community finance institution, you might be working with the wrong type of lender, and you may need to make some quick changes in order to take advantage of that program. And then finally, again, the Local First We Rise Accelerator window application is open. And so if that's an accelerator program you're interested in, we have the information here. We'll post that link in the chat as well. So with that, we want to jump into the upcoming sessions. Today we have our cybersecurity session. Thursday we have our understanding financial statements. It's a second session by the folks at the Central Arizona College SBDC, Northland Pioneer College SBDC, and Coconino Community College SBDC. They're put together 4 unique programs or sessions. Each one's a great individual session, but when you combine all 4, it makes a great 4-part series. And again, if you missed the first one, the recording is available in the archive. Go back and watch that, and join us on Thursday for the Understanding Financial Statements. Then on Tuesday, June 1st, we've got Setting the Stage for Resilient Performance Post-Pandemic. And that's going to be from Nick Tobey from the University of Arizona. And then Thursday, June 3rd, we have Financial Forecasting and Cash Flow Projections, again from that team of SBDC directors from the Small Business Development Centers. So with that, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Mark Kirstein from Cosant Cybersecurity. Mark's been with us before on a number of bootcamp sessions. We enjoy having him with us. He does a great job, and we're excited for today's session. So Mark, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you and let you share your screen.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. And as I get started here today, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to give you guys a warning right up front of the perils of working from home, which I'm sure many of us are, as well as myself. But in my instance, I have my wife away from the house and contractors working on a different part of the house, and the dogs in my office with me to keep them from going crazy. So it's a recipe for potential, not disaster, but potential interruptions, let's call it, during the webinar. If you hear the dogs bark and suddenly go crazy, it's because the contractors did something. So fair warning up front. And it's always interesting to see how the pandemic and the environment that we now work in from our remote offices and zooming in and the like exposes the humanity in us, and it's a good thing. Unfortunately, it's also exposes the dark side of humanity to some degree, because the cybersecurity criminals in the world have gone haywire in the pandemic, taking advantage of the uncertainty and changes that are taking place throughout the economy. We're going to talk about some of those things today and just explore, because one of the things that we see is that counter to intuition or your own personal views of how small of a business I am, or how exposed or not exposed I am, we're seeing these incidents of breaches and ransomware and business email compromise across all kinds of businesses of all sizes. And it's just very, very persistent. And the first things we're going to talk about today, before we finish today, we're going to give you some basic tips, if you will, to make sure that at least the doors are closed, that your doors are locked, so that you're not an easy victim. And then some insights into what's happening and how you can also think about how to stay safe and realize that this is not a situation where only the larger companies are vulnerable. Actually, the small and medium businesses are very, very vulnerable. Over the course of the last couple weeks, we've been working with one of our business partnerships and delivered some presentations, some of which you'll see today. Some was a little bit more distinct from this today. But we probably talked to 100 Arizona-based businesses ranging from, around $1 million, maybe a little bit less than $1 million, up to probably $50 to $100 million in size. And I can tell you, based on the feedback, they were small sessions, everybody was sharing, being interactive. Probably 80% of the businesses have had some exposure or impact from cybersecurity directly. And so if you haven't seen that direct impact on your business, you're lucky, number one. Number two, watch for it, be careful. It's a very dynamic environment. Now, the title that we chose for today is why cyber criminals don't care if you're a good target. In other words, we hear way too often, I'm too small to be a target for cybersecurity. The criminals don't care. Criminals are not necessarily coming straight after you. So we're going to talk about that question for the first, roughly half of our discussion today. I'm too small to be a cybersecurity target. Why are small and medium businesses a primary target for the bad guys and the cyber criminals out there? And the first piece of this is, cyber criminals aren't hunting you, typically. It's always an exception to the rule, but generally they're not narrowing in and opening up the Google directory of businesses and saying, I want to target this specific business, let's go after them. They're phishing. They're phishing using a net. They have automated programs that are sending out spam emails and fraudulent claims on a regular basis, and they're just hoping that you will be careless or your employees will be careless and you'll fall into the net. And then all they have to do once you fall into the net is they have to decide, are you worth exploiting or not? So it's not a matter of them targeting you or saying, I want to go after this particular company. It's more of, I've now caught this company because there was no baseline protections, or somebody made a mistake. What am I going to do about it? Am I going to ransomware this company? Am I going to use business email compromise and do a fraud against the company and trick them into sending money? How am I going to exploit the opportunity, or perhaps even just leverage your platform to launch an attack against somebody else and disguise their tracks by essentially blaming it on you, by masquerading as your company rather than as themselves, because they don't want to get caught. So realize, number one, that a primary threat is social engineering, right? It's the people, that's the vulnerability. Many companies that we've experienced with, they have some of the baseline technical controls. They may not have all of them configured the best way. There may be some gaps, but they have the basic technical controls. But that misses the majority of the challenge, which is, the people are vulnerable to making mistakes. And the more uncertainty or change in your day-to-day processes and day-to-day systems, the more vulnerable you are to mistakes that the bad guys are going to try to exploit. So that's why I back up and I say, the pandemic, as we all shifted from in-office work to in-home work, that created a gap in people's understanding of how to get their jobs done and what resources they needed to use and what, how to be careful and what the vulnerabilities and threats were. And the bad guys took advantage of that gap. Same as we're now somewhat returning to what we characterized as normal, meaning going back to the office or changing back. It's a change once again, and they're going to look for the opportunity to use that information to trick our employees and to trick us into clicking on the link. So realize that what they're looking for is they're looking for change, and they're using automated campaigns to broadly target across all companies of all sizes And they're often doing data mining of any intelligence that they can get, because that enables them to tell a better story, which creates a better fraud, or creates a more likelihood of somebody clicking on the wrong link and exposing their company and themselves to the downside attached to it. Let's talk about the second one, and this is probably the biggest threat right now is ransomware. And depending on the size of business, as a small business, we may not think that we're a lucrative target for ransomware, but actually the question is not what your data or what your company is worth to the criminals. The question is, what is your data worth to you? Because that's what they're relying on when they talk about ransomware, is if I can capture you, then if you're willing to pay to get your business back up and running, it doesn't matter what the data is worth to me. I may, depending on the source of the data and what data I get, there may be a secondary market. People do sell data. You sell, medical records. You could sell social security numbers. You could sell financial records, when you've exploited it from a company. But often that's not the path they choose to take. Instead, they choose to look at what you think the data is worth to you, and sell it back to you, essentially. So a couple of questions that we often have in this realm is, let's suppose that I'm ransomware. What am I supposed to do about it? Do I pay or do I not pay in the case of ransomware? And unfortunately, it's a much more complex question than an easy answer can immediately give you. Ideally, if you're well prepared in the cybersecurity realm, you've already asked the question ahead of time. You've identified what your threats are, what your vulnerability is, what the value of your data is, what data is critical, what data is not critical, and what purpose that data is critical for. And those are all baseline information that we need in order to help decide, should we pay them or not pay them, in the case of a ransomware attack. A couple of things that I need to think about when I'm evaluating that question. One is, the data value, is it based on confidentiality? Meaning, if I expose this data to the outside world, or if the bad guys who are threatening to expose this to the outside world go ahead and do that, everybody in the dark web, and perhaps even broader, can see that this data has been exposed. The sensitivity of the data may be such that that's catastrophic for you and your business, and for the people whose data has been exposed. For example, healthcare records right now are one of the most lucrative pieces of sensitive data. They're very valuable because they can then lead to a path of exploiting insurance payments and exploiting that particular consumer at an additional level. Probably more valuable than financial data, because it's an easier exploit than trying to leverage a credit card number that can be changed very quickly. Your insurance numbers, your social security numbers that attach to personal health information are very difficult to change, and thus very difficult to contain once they've been exposed. So in the case of that sensitive confidential data, if I'm concerned about that being exposed on the internet, it doesn't matter if I have backups or not, because the downside, the most significant threat to my business, is the exposure of that data. And even if I have backups and I can not pay the ransomware and recover my data set and be back up and running, I'm still going to end up exposing those records. And that by itself can be a very costly exposure. One cost, of course, is your brand and reputation, because people quickly find out about these things when they're exposed publicly in this sense. Another cost is the regulatory, challenge that you might have in terms of, I've exposed personal health information. HIPAA would apply. There's possible HIPAA violations with severe penalties attached to it. Another one might be privacy information, and depending on what state that you operate in, the exposure of data can result in fines. Can result in notification requirements that can be quite costly, can result in your company having to pay for data monitoring or personal information monitoring through a third-party service. All of those can be extremely costly, often more costly than the ransomware itself. The second piece of information that I might that I probably want to know in the case of ransomware is what's the impact on my operation? So is a manufacturer, for example, staying up and running can be one of the most critical elements. The longer we stay down, the more impact and downside of the business. That is one that can be largely mitigated or reduced by having backups. But you need to make sure that those backups haven't been corrupted also, because oftentimes what we see is if they've gotten into the data set, they'll often linger in your system for quite some time. And so your backups might be corrupted, or your backups for several months might be corrupted. And now you're talking about taking a step back and losing months worth of data, even if you are able to get back up and running. Have you tested that backup recovery and restoration plan? Do you have confidence that that's going to work and get you back up and running? All of that, of course, is part of the decision of, am I going to pay the ransomware? Am I not going to pay the ransomware? The third piece, and this is one of the more interesting ones, there actually is what we call a Yelp service for hackers. Amazingly enough, there's a government-run, FBI-run service that characterizes how trustworthy the hackers are. What is the likelihood of them returning your data and getting you back up and running if you pay them? And those records are tracked. Therefore, you have a opportunity to include that as part of your decision as to whether to pay them or not. All of those go back to situational dependent. What is the nature of my business? What is the nature of my threats? Should I pay? Should I not pay? Of course, you may want to also get your insurance company involved in this if you have cyber insurance, because they will be by your side in navigating the response to a ransomware event. You can see probably in the data on the slide here, the ransomware average across the U.S., the amount of compromise and expense that is attached to a ransomware has now grown to about $850,000 across all sizes of business across the U.S. That is an enormous rate of inflation, if you will, if you want to call it that, and it keeps going up because it keeps working. I'm going to circle back real quick. The bad guys that are participating in this actually have a significant incentive in the case of ransomware to give you your data back if you pay them. Of course, it's not universal, but the challenge that they have is that they are tracked. And if they start not restoring data after people have paid, their reputation, because they are known entities, the FBI knows who the people are, we know who some of them are. They're generally known entities that are running sophisticated ransomware business operations to capture you, often via a net attack rather than a targeted attack, and then just take the money as quickly as they can and move on. But if they start not following through on their promises, their reputation quickly gets around and they're basically put out of business. So it may seem counterintuitive that the bad guys themselves would have a reputation and some level of integrity, but it's integrity based on the realities of business rather than based on good intentions. Actually, before I move on, I'll just pause for a minute here to characterize that, the most famous, it's good timing for us to have this discussion about cybersecurity because we have had a significant series of public events over the last, 6 months or so, starting with SolarWinds, which we'll circle back to in a couple of moments. But the latest one with Pipeline that was brought down through a ransomware attack. And that one was initiated based on clicking on a bad email that then compromised the system that resulted in a massive disruption to critical infrastructure. Now, many companies, or if not most companies, are not that exposed to the point of bringing down half the country's oil supply in response to an attack. But I can tell you, even in the case of the Colonial Pipeline that was taken down, it was somewhat of a mistake on the part of the cyber criminals. They didn't intend or didn't anticipate the level of impact that intrusion and ransomware would have, and it's a mistake only in the sense that the consequences were so significant that the scrutiny now applied to this group, which has been identified, is enormous. And you don't want to be a visible criminal. The smartest criminals are as incognito and under the radar as they can get. Suddenly they have the entire might of the U.S. counterintelligence world for cybersecurity going after them and trying to attack that group, and that was counter to what they wanted. But the lesson that I see in that is that they're taking all comers in terms of the companies that they're going to attack. And if you fall into the net, they're not probably going to see that level of scrutiny or the level of anticipation that they had there, but they're still going to look at your company and see what they can get from you. And it's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure in the moment to make quick decisions and to be able to respond to it at a time when you're under stress and uncertain. The key to that part is to be prepared ahead of time so that when in the moment you have a playbook, you've got a system and a process to evaluate what to do and where to do next. So let's look at the next myth, if you will. I'm too small to be a cybersecurity target. They may not be targeting you, right? So once again, we talked about the automation and the net phishing, but there's another one that is a little bit more deliberate in terms of targeting, but it's still not looking for you specifically. It's looking for your customers or your suppliers. So, if we think of ourselves as, we're not that significant in the big picture of the world, why would they come after us? Remember, if I deal with third parties that are larger than I am, they may just compromise me to get at those third parties. So I did promise before to talk a little bit more about SolarWinds. SolarWinds was a classic example of a supply chain attack. So, the end target was ultimately not SolarWinds. SolarWinds was the channel or the vehicle to get to the end target, which were enormously complex and sophisticated enterprise level businesses and organizations. Through the SolarWinds attack, they were able to get into the Treasury Department, into the Department of Energy, into major significant enterprise level companies that have thousands of security professionals trying to protect their facilities and trying to keep the intrusions out. And so, the criminals that are involved in this, they don't want to go straight at a hard target. They're going to look for the soft target, which is typically the suppliers to those companies. The suppliers then become the soft target that get infiltrated. If the suppliers have a tight and digital relationship with their customers, then they piggyback on the back of those companies to get into the larger companies, and they achieve their compromise in that fashion. That's exactly what happened with SolarWinds. Was that long linger time and that patience and meticulous embedding into the system to then gain access to the ultimate end target, which is the enterprise level companies that were difficult to penetrate in any other fashion. In the case of SolarWinds, I love when we have interactive discussions here. Unfortunately, in this setting, it's somewhat of a monologue, but the interactive piece is: do you know how long is the average amount of time that a cyber criminal is inside of a system before it's detected? Right, so rhetorical question, because I know you can't answer directly, but in the case of SolarWinds, they were up inside of the SolarWinds system for up to 2 years. Originally, it was thought to be 9 months, but the information coming out now is that it may have been as long as 2 years in SolarWinds system to then have SolarWinds distribute their malware and compromise situation to their customers and embed that in all kinds of other networks. The average across the US for the time from intrusion to detection is about 1 year. So surprised me when I first learned some of those things, that a year between the time they get into your network to the time when it's discovered, because oftentimes they're using your system and platform to gain more information, to exploit more things. They don't want to strike instantaneously and become detected and lose the opportunity to optimize or maximize what they're getting out of a compromised situation. Smaller businesses, it's probably shorter because they are more likely to move quickly to a fraud or a ransomware type situation in order to exploit quickly. But nevertheless, don't expect that as soon as they get in, they're going to pull the trigger to do an exploitation. Now let's talk a little bit more about probably what I would characterize for smaller businesses. This may be the biggest risk that you face. And the smaller you get, the more likely these tend to be the risk, is business email compromise. Yep. How many of you or your employees have gotten emails that characterize that I need you to buy me some Amazon gift cards for the conference that I'm going to, or please change my invoice to update my payment information to this account versus that account. Those are the fairly straightforward ones. Their goal basically is to take advantage, once again, through mostly social engineering, but once they've compromised your system or your customer system or your supplier system, they're going to use that position of pseudo trust to try to trick you into doing something that's going to enable them to extract money from you, or perhaps extract money from your customers or your suppliers. So here's a very common scenario, probably the most common that we see. Let's say for a moment that I've compromised one of your systems. As the bad guy, I've been able to access your email system. I get in. It might be through a compromised email server. It might be through a compromised password. It might be me just masquerading and not even compromising your system, but masquerading my emails in such a way that they look like they're coming from your domain or your server, but they're really not. So all of those are platforms that they then use to say, okay, let's now send information to one of your customers, as an example. And I'm going to tell your customer that our banking data has changed and I need you to update your invoice to reflect this new account number or this new routing number. Now, this email looks like it's coming from your domain name. It looks fairly authoritative. They may reply back and ask some more questions, but because the bad guys are infiltrated into your system, they're not going to allow that reply back to come back to you so that you can see it. They're going to intercept that email and have a conversation. Sometimes we see these to be very extended long-term conversations between the supplier and the company to gain their trust, to answer the questions, to try to keep that dialogue going until the exploitation is complete. Because once they have changed that account number and you've wired, or your customer has wired information into that account, trust me, I've almost heard, I can't think of any instances where somebody in this situation has come to us and said that they've gotten the money back. It seems that instantaneously, as soon as the money has been transferred, that money is lost and gone forever, and that it's untraceable and difficult to find back. So these are the relatively simple ones. The more complex ones we've seen where a whole series of emails may go back and forth between executives at the company, but they're all fraud, they're all fake, and only the victim is seeing this traffic going back and forth that looks legitimate, has dialogue, has it, but it's all intended to get this one controller or CFO or finance administrator to do what they want, to wire money to perpetrate this fraud. In the case of what I just described, was a customer of ours that's in the HVAC industry, moderately mid-sized HVAC, not in the Valley, somewhere else across the country, that ended up wiring $850,000 before they realized that there was a compromise, that the conversations were not legitimate. Finally, they did find that they were not able to recover the money. Even a cyber insurance case is going to be difficult to cover that scale. Oftentimes for smaller businesses and for more expedient things, the losses are in the $5,000 to $10,000 to $25,000 range, as opposed to $850,000. They're just looking for what is the easiest path and what's the most lucrative path. Now dial back to the example that I characterized a minute ago, where somebody infiltrated your system or impersonated your system to perpetrate a fraud on your customer. So now there's a couple of bad things that are going on in this particular scenario. You've been compromised, so the integrity of your system is compromised. So you need to take some level of action. Your customer has lost money because they've wired it to the wrong account, but your customer blames you because they believe that the fraud came from you, which may be legitimate, may not be legitimate, because there are certainly cases where an impersonation can take place where they've not infiltrated your system at all. But where you end up with in that scenario is a finger pointing match to start with, and trying to attribute blame and figure out what happened and remediate it, but also a fight in a sense. And who wants to be fighting with their customers? Even if I'm in the right, I don't want the tension or the uncertainty of having a fight with my customers in that scenario. And then worst case scenario, because this is also running rampant, is a lawsuit or a legal action that takes place in either direction. So it's nothing but downside. Even if I'm not the one that ultimately lost the money, I'm still going to be a victim of that situation. I still may share in some level of the liability. And remember that these are the compromises that could take place to your customer, could take place to your supplier, could take place to you and your organization internally, all basically based on email compromise. These are also the case where the enterprise companies are attuned to this. They watch what's happening with SolarWinds. They have their own vulnerabilities. So if you have enterprise level customers, if you have Department of Defense or sensitive industry customers, if you have more and more municipal government, state government, federal government, the governments are moving a little bit quicker on this front. They realize that part of their security plan and part of their vulnerability is to make sure that their suppliers don't put them at risk. You are their suppliers, or you may be one of their suppliers. Meaning that they're now going to look at your situation and say, is this small business putting me at risk because they touch my systems in some capacity, right? So if you are seeing cybersecurity questionnaires come your way, there's a number of different reasons for that. One of them is supply chain management and keeping control of the vulnerability attached to the supply chain management. They're going to send you a cybersecurity questionnaire that asks you what you're doing about various aspects of security. And if you answer no to those questions, or if you don't answer them in a appropriate fashion, then you may not get the contract. And it becomes what we characterize as revenue friction that's going to prevent you from being effective at working with your customers. And even if you can answer yes to many of them, while you're responding to the cybersecurity questionnaires, your sales team is stalled. They had a deal, they were close to getting that across the finish line. They're stalled while they deal with a cybersecurity questionnaire that doesn't just stop at the IT organization, that actually needs to go to human resources because some questions relate to policy, might need to go to the accounting because some questions go to accounting, might need to go to legal because there's some legal questions embedded in it. Meantime, your organization is not selling to these customers or not making business easy to work with these customers as they try to navigate through this. Similarly, we're seeing compliance requirements passed through, so that's just a more formal and formal and systematic way of enforcing supply chain management and security questionnaires is they may ask you for a SOC 2 compliance, which is a security standard for SaaS companies and service companies. They may, if you're in the military, they may ask you for a CMMC, and I don't mean directly in the military, but part of the defense industrial base supplying to the Department of Defense. They'll ask you for a standard called CMMC, which is now going to be audited and enforced over the next couple of years. That mandates that you do all of the basics to get your security in place. These are things that are perpetuating throughout the industry. Even cybersecurity insurance is now providing a much more rigorous questionnaire process attached to it because they are seeing significant losses. They're passing those losses through to businesses like ourselves in the form of higher premiums. And they're also requiring more intrusion information and protection information to see if you're doing the basics to keep your business up and running. Another myth, I'm too small to be a cybersecurity target again. Remember, we're a means to an end. the small fish gets eaten by the bigger fish, gets eaten by the bigger fish. If you have privileged access to your customer's network, you become their vulnerability. They want to protect that, but the cyber criminals recognize that opportunity to exploit a larger company or to use that as the soft point of entry for those larger targets. So let's now shift gears a little bit. What are you really worth to a cyber criminal for your business? Now, I know we've probably got a variety of businesses of different size and scale. It relates all the way down to individuals. If they, as an individual, they can target you and get some easy money out of you, they'll target an individual. As a larger company, they look for more things. But the things that I'm going to really look at from a business standpoint is, what are my financial assets? So size of the company, revenue stream, that base of information, it matters, right? The more financial assets you are, the more likely you are to pay ransomware, the more likely you are to enable low-end scams, where the $5,000, $10,000 might not be as material as it would be to a smaller company. But at the same time, it's not necessarily decisive, because it's not about how much the business, the data and the information is worth to them, it's how much it's worth to you. Do you have access to, and where and how have you secured personally identifiable information records? Right. So privacy is a category of security, because you can't have privacy without security. Privacy's got its own dynamics, its own realm of things to be dealt with, as well as its own regulatory scheme that are out there. But how much personally identifiable information do you have that the bad guys can get? And we've seen everything from consumer-based companies that have a lot of personally identifiable information records, and exposure of that data exposes them to legal liability, regulation liability, all the way back to companies that have exposed all of the personal data of all their employees. So it may not be a tremendous amount of personally identifiable information for a huge volume of people, but still, if you have 100 employees and their social security numbers and personal information like insurance numbers, income numbers, and those things are exposed, it can be very devastating for your company as well. Do you have personal health information records? Do you have financial records either for yourself or for your clients? Right. So the amount of my contracts, the amount of financial data I have access. And the last question here is, what access do you have and to whom? So one of the things that I mentioned before is the SOC 2 certification, which is a privacy standard for software as a service companies and some other service level companies, administered through the AICPA, which is the Association of Public Accountants. It's an audited standard, and it's really geared around, how does my data expose, or the way that I treat my data and my customer data expose my client? Can I prove that I'm safe in this context? This is one that ties right back to what access do you have, because if I, as a SaaS company, am integrated into my customer's data set, that's a point of exposure for that customer. So SaaS companies in particular, the more integration you have, the more exposure from a cybersecurity to a supply chain attack. Companies want to protect against that. So just an example of that scenario that we've seen play out several times over, combination of the SOC 2 as well as the enterprise companies enforcing their rules. We've got several clients now that are working with the largest social media companies and providing services and tools to the major social media companies. And those companies have been told, essentially, you must have SOC 2 compliance within 6 months, or you can no longer do business with us. And if you do get your SOC 2 compliance, then we're going to take your platform, we're going to integrate it more comprehensively into our platform, because we now have a higher level of trust for you. And we're actually going to increase the volume of business that we do with you, and increase the number of transactions, because it's easier to do business with you, and it's more efficient to have you tied into our systems directly. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you get compliant with these standards. So just back to the original question, what access do you have and to whom? where do your systems integrate with your customer systems electronically? Might just be through email, but if it's more pervasive than that. And same thing for your suppliers. If your suppliers have some type of direct access to your systems, that's a point of vulnerability that you should be thinking about as well. So let's take a quick look at what that vulnerability looks like and what some of these various entry points are. We talked about opportunistic intrusion, right? So this is casting out of a net, coming after you opportunistically. If you fall into their net, they're going to look for an opportunity to exploit you. They can hijack your email or your network. That could be to attack you or your customers, but it could also be completely unrelated to your business, other than they're using your business, your domain name, your platform as cover for bad stuff that they're doing to some other company to try to cover their tracks. Think of you as a source of computing power, of integrity, of access, that if they then run attack on somebody else, if that's detected, it looks like you did it rather than they did it. Ultimately, that probably would not be played out in terms of them blaming you for it, but at least in terms of hiding their tracks and staying under the radar screen. They love to exploit their access in your platform to propagate access to other people's platforms. Business email compromise, we talked about at length, how they're going to defraud, how they're going to take advantage of this. Ransomware, of course, and the supply chain attack. Just to look at this, if we would characterize it as the threat environment to the small businesses. I think we've already talked a little bit about the compliance ones. I'll just call out a few of the additional standards that I didn't talk about yet, which is the GDPR, the privacy standard for Europe, CCPA. Now these privacy standards have started to proliferate in different states. So privacy is becoming, somebody recently characterized it, it's like sales tax used to be, where every state is different and you have to have a management platform or a comprehensive view of each of the different privacy regulations across all these different states. All of those become regulatory challenges that if you have a systematic security plan coupled with a privacy plan, you're going to be more effective at responding to these cybersecurity questionnaires. You're going to have more yeses, which is going to make it easier to do business with you, and you're going to be, kind of a favored or differentiated company operating from a relatively secure standpoint compared to those companies which primarily haven't done anything. So hopefully one of the things that we were looking to take away from our discussion here today as well. And by the way, please feel free to include questions. I can take a few questions at the end before we finish up. And also, one of the motivations that we have, obviously, we are a business. We like working with our customers and helping them avoid these type of situations, but we're also part of the community. And it really hurts sometimes when you hear the frauds take place and you hear the companies that have been exposed or vulnerable. So we want to help the community become more safe. We want to give out some of the basic information here for you to deploy yourself. We also want to be part of the community, meaning if you guys want to reach out to me and ask questions one-on-one or engage directly, I'll make sure that we share our contact information. Our goal is to develop relationships, help the community, as well as, of course, run a business. So what can we do as small businesses or medium-sized businesses? I'm going to characterize the first couple of pieces as just lock your front door. I cannot tell you how many companies don't even think about some of the basics. They rely on their IT company, or perhaps their IT company wants to talk about security, but they haven't given them the time to talk about security. Talk to your IT company about security. I realize I jumped to the last one, so I'll hold back on that for a moment, but here's some of the basics. Hopefully all of you know multi-factor authentication. It's the mechanism where you have to get a text message or some other separate confirmation of your password when you log into a particular system. Turn it on. One of the, there's so many of the basics that we would characterize. I'd like to say this is the number one thing you need to do. It is one of the top things that you should be doing, is turn on multi-factor authentication in as many platforms as you can. I know it's a pain in the butt. It is very, very effective at reducing the compromise of one of the biggest threats, which is your email system and somebody compromising your passwords. Especially if nothing else, turn it on for financial institutions and anything that's highly sensitive. Make sure that those are turned on. It's a significant step to locking the front door, if you will. Use a password management tool. So once again, we have a situation where passwords are a vulnerability because people use really simple passwords. I know none of you on the line are doing this, but password 123, not so good. Football, wizard, and I'm just rattling off a few of the ones that I've seen over the last couple of weeks as we did dark web scans on companies that we've been working with and doing presentations for. We do the dark web scans and we can see what passwords have been exposed, and the bad guys can see this as well. If you have a URL that's been in business for any period of time, I almost guarantee, because it's like 95% of the URLs we do a dark web scan on, we find username and password information on the dark web in the clear, where you can clearly see what the passwords are. And guess what else we see? We see the world's simplest passwords. Football, the world's simplest passwords, and we see the passwords reused on multiple sites. Where they use the same password for LinkedIn, they use the same password for Home Depot, they might use the same password, hopefully not, but if they use the same password for the bank account. That's what the bad guys are counting on, is these passwords have been exposed, not through your fault or your company's fault necessarily, but through a third party that's been compromised that exposed this data onto the internet. Now you can see the passwords. They'll take those passwords and they'll try other accounts to see if you've reused your passwords. Easy stuff. Password management tool gets rid of it, right? Because password management tool will create complex passwords, much more complex than most of us humans want to remember, but complex passwords, but also passwords that will be unique for every site. And then all you have to do is make sure that your password for the password manager, they're very secure platforms. Make sure that the password for your password management is complex, but secure in the sense that you're not sharing that with anybody else, because that is the key to the kingdom of one point. Change your default passwords. Every piece of hardware or equipment that you buy, if your IT department is managing it, they may have already done this. We still find oftentimes that they haven't. If you're managing your own IT, or if you haven't given complete access to some very significant IT professionals, the password defaults are the same on all hardware that's purchased coming out of the gate, and you need to make sure that those default passwords are changed. So change the default passwords on your wireless access point, change them on any type of device that you have that might be exposed, because the bad guys all know what the default passwords. It's a really simple change that offers a lot of protection, but all too often overlooked. Back up your data. Good backups enable you to have a lot more resilience in the case of a compromise, whether it's hardware-based failure or a compromise from a cyber criminal. The backups of the data, and secure those backups to the data in a isolated location where the compromise can't also get the backups. Encrypt your notebooks. Now, people are out in the field, people are working remotely, people bring their notebooks with them. It's very, very easy to have those notebooks encrypted, simply because both Apple and Microsoft have included BitLocker in the case of Microsoft, or the Apple equivalent in their baseline operating system. All you have to do is turn it on, right? So make sure that your laptops are encrypted so that if those laptops are stolen or compromised, that people don't gain access to the entire data set. If you have BitLocker or other encryption turned on, they may have access to that laptop, but if they take the hard drive out, they still won't be able to get to the data. And you won't have data exposure, confidential data. You also won't have that source of information readily available to the bad guys for them to look at and look for other ways to exploit your system. Train yourself and your staff. I already said, the social engineering compromise is one of the biggest threats to the organization, and a lot of it comes from training, and a lot of it comes from policy. there are certain threats like business email compromise that are pure, fraud based. If we train our people to be aware, to ask the right questions, but also if we put together the right policies to be able to say, what is the appropriate use of various data? Do I have a password for work at home? I'm sorry, not a password. Do I have a policy for work at home devices? For bring your own device or connect your device to the corporate network? Do I have a policy for how that's going to work? Do I have a policy as to whether my employees can store their data in their home computer or whether it needs to be stored only in the cloud? Do I have a policy for what steps need to be taken to change the routing number or account number in a payment invoice or something to that effect? Those policies are what stops business email compromise, because instead of just changing the account numbers and then wiring the money to the wrong place, either for you or your customers, you have a double check that says, I need to have voice confirmation. You need to actually pick up the phone and talk to somebody before that's going to take place. And that will compromise many of these business email compromises. And the last one that I'll throw out here is consult with your IT team. We have a lot of companies that we work with that are in the MSP or IT space. They're looking to help, but it's not necessarily embedded in their standard offering. They may need to charge you more, but in exchange, you get better security. You'll look for the opportunity to have that discussion with them. Last, what are your biggest risks? You got to plan ahead. You got to look at these situations of a ransomware or a business email compromise or another threat, and know what I'm going to do when those take place, not if those take place. Now, the common wisdom is when you're inflicted by a cybersecurity hack, not if. What will you do when you have a breach? And if you choose to engage a security consultant, that's the kind of work that we do, is a vulnerability assessment to understand what the risks are, identify how to mitigate those risks, lock the front doors, make sure that you've got a system and a process in place for deploying security across the platform. Real quick through this, cyber insurance is a good thing. We are advocates for it. Just make sure that your policies don't exclude social engineering attacks. Many do. Make sure that they don't exclude unauthorized software installation. That's another one of the primary attack vectors. Make sure that you check your policies for exclusions and clauses and understand what your policy is going to cover, and incorporate your cyber insurance into your disaster recovery or business continuity plan. So you know, when do I call the cyber insurance? When do I call my attorneys? When do I call the various people that are going to help me recover from this? And realize that when we do get to the stage where we've implemented security, it can now become a differentiator. Now I want to brag to my customers. I've done the security baselines. I've got SOC 2, or I've got another standard. What's more fundamental to working with your customers is trust, because people buy from companies and people that they like to trust. Be trustworthy for your customers, and that will pay back. And universally, we see the companies that take this journey end up with a differentiator in the market and something that enables them to work more effectively with their customers. So with that, I'm going to finish up. You can reach us. You can reach myself at mark@cosant.com. We help customers with the things that we've talked about here. We're happy to talk with you, whether directly engaged or just consult and answer questions, because we want to help the community at large be more effective. And that will be it for today. So let me share my contact information in the chat window while I hand it back to Robert to close up.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. That's a great presentation. Real quick, a quick question I have is, on a previous slide, you mentioned some of the programs for password protection, to house your passwords. What would be some of the programs to use, or that you'd recommend that businesses might look at for that?
Yes. So the password managers
Yes.
So there are dozens of them. LastPass, OnePass are some of the bigger names. But if you just type in PC World top 10 password managers, all 10 of those are very solid products. They're extremely cost effective, if not free. They range from free for basic usage to maybe $5 a month for these. And once you get used to using them, they actually make things pretty effective, and they're very secure. So just look at those PC World Top 10s. Look at the different feature sets and capabilities that you're looking for. Any of them are very solid.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're right at time again. Mark, thank you for taking your time today and sharing this with us. For those attending, the presentation is recorded and will be posted on the website later today, along with the slide deck, so you can refer to that information as needed. Again, we appreciate the time, Mark, and we appreciate everybody for attending and joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Until then, everybody have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.